Welcome to the love-infused ravings of Bach. Ayahuasca and the Breath. It's good to remember that if fear arises, particularly in a plant medicine journey, but it could be anything, it could be a silent retreat, breath work, anything, anytime. But I'm just thinking of plant medicine journeys at the moment because of the nature of it and the nature of the intensity of some of the stories that we get caught up in. And it's always valuable to remember to go back to the breath. Anytime there's fear or confusion, any mind, right? Any time we get stuck in mind and we're struggling with it and wrestling with it, if it pops back into your brain, go back to the breath. Plant that seed early on and work with it, test it. Find out how powerful it can be for you. Again, don't take my word for anything, but I'm going to give you the clue, right? I'll give you the suggestion and the clue, and then you try it out yourself. For me, it's extremely powerful. That was how I was taught by ayahuasca the first time I did ayahuasca. The first 6 times I did ayahuasca about 30 years ago at this point, which is hard to believe. And I was crazy. My mind was crazy. That's why I went to do it, because I was killing myself with thinking, with worrying. And the first many journeys, and particularly the first one, was absolutely terrifying. I was, in the worst kind of hell with my mind. And the ayahuasca just kept saying, just go back to go to the breath, go to the breath. And I'd already started a meditation practice, maybe 6 months before, maybe even less than that. Yeah, probably about 6 months before. So I kind of knew the power of breath in a sense. In a very, very basic form at that point. But ayahuasca was this incredibly clear teacher for me. And it would always remind me, go back to the breath. You can trust the breath. It showed me you can't trust anything you can't trust thought at all. You can't trust it. And we're just talking in the reference of a journey and working on ourselves and trying to see through our painful stories. It doesn't mean you can't trust your mind if it says 2 + 2 is 4. So in the living world, the relative world, the world we live in day to day, yeah, of course, the minds, it can be absolutely, it is absolutely necessary and clear, and it can be trusted in many ways. But if we're looking to find peace of mind, freedom from our struggles, the mind isn't the place to find that. And for that reason, we can't trust it on that search. And quickly, particularly during those ayahuasca journeys in the beginning, I had so many years, it seemed, of being lost in the suffering mind. So the habit was so strong at that point, and I was so overwhelmed by the medicine, but not to the point that I went unconscious. I remember the entire night extraordinarily clearly, and certainly how terrifying it was. But it was so hard for me to not be lost in thought during that journey, in hell, essentially. And these worry stories, the struggle stories that I had in my life were amplified by 100. They just became crazy and terrifying to the point where my body was, I couldn't lie still for a second. I was just writhing. But the ayahuasca gently and insistently over a couple journeys was, go back to the breath. You can trust the breath. You can't trust thought. it's just going to keep going. It's not going to resolve. You're not going to get a resolution here. Not in this mind, not the mind you're working with. And I started to learn to bring my attention to the breath. At the time, it was like I had to hold on to it with everything I had, because thought would want to pull me back into these stories and how seductive they are and how important they seem and how real they seem. But I was taught during those sessions to go back to my breath, that that's what I could trust, that it said your breath has no story, like it has no agenda. You can trust it. And I was like, wow. And like I came, it was very clear that was true. That was true. And I started to trust it more and more. I remember that was one of the great teachings that ayahuasca gave me. But it wasn't like when you started keeping your attention on the breath that you all of a sudden got the answers to your problems. You know, it wasn't like you were shown solutions that you couldn't see before necessarily. You start to realize that the problems are just thoughts. And if our attention is on our breath, it can't be on our thoughts. And so the problems go away until we think about them again. Because we get more and more comfortable with the freedom of our attention on our breath, the relative freedom. We want to be there more and more often. And we start to see that our problems have always just been in our head. It doesn't mean there aren't things to do in the world and to work out in this, but the problem part of it is in our minds. And so when I was given that lesson of keeping my attention on my breath, I was doing it for dear life in the beginning. It was so crazy to be in my mind during an ayahuasca journey that it was like a life vest. I did it just to hold on for dear life. But it started teaching me, and the medicine started teaching me. It was just the simplest, most profound, deepest kind of teaching, where this small thing ends up having this remarkable power. Or we think of it as a small thing, the breath. So steady, I mean, kind of by default, right? It has to be. We can always count on it. And it doesn't have any story, it doesn't have any agenda. We can trust it. And what a remarkable lesson, what a remarkable thing to be taught. And then think of all the things that these plant medicines can teach us, right? And then they teach us certain things. Each of us gets taught certain things that help us be freer, they're bespoke, right? They're custom medicine at the most profound level. And it turned out like that's how things started to open up for me, was I didn't have to follow the right thoughts. I didn't have to figure it out at the level of mind. I didn't have to figure out my problems or my life, at the level of mind. So as I turned my attention to the breath, and that became easier and easier and more delicious and delightful and freer and easier and lighter, more joyful. Just being like again, we're talking about being on a journey. And during the journey, the mind being quiet and the music playing and losing yourself, right? Dissolving, losing yourself, and the freedom of that. The freedom of a quiet mind, right? The freedom of just being still and quiet inside and letting go, right? Not having to work anything out, not having to stay vigilant about anything. So many people talk about vigilance, and it's a great thing. And I suppose we can differentiate it from hypervigilance, but just think about it. Think what vigilance means. And even if you don't know the exact definition, you know how it feels, right? When you think about being vigilant, it's got a certain rigidity to it, a sort of rapt attention or paying attention at all. It has that sense that like you can't let your guard down, or you can never fully relax, you have to stay vigilant. And that's not right in the end, right? That's not right. It's a beautiful concept, and it's useful in so many ways, but not as a direction towards looking for our deeper nature, for our beings. We don't have to stay vigilant. Who would it be? Who's vigilant? How could that be our deeper nature? How could vigilance be part of our natural being? That doesn't make any sense. The natural being is everything. It needs no protection. It needs no vigilance. It needs no one, watching over it. Or, I mean, come on, right? It's absurd. How small would it be if we were the ones looking over it? Right? It doesn't need vigilance. So we can let go of that idea too. We can let go. We have to. When you let go, there's no vigilance left when we've let go. It may come back again, but in the state, when we let go and we experience letting go, there's nothing, right? There's no doing. It's not like we let go and now we're feeling lighter. Like when we really let go, everything goes, right? Particularly the story about ourselves, even if it's for a short period. I mean, what else is there? What else is there that we are concerned about than the story about ourselves? After working with that first bit of ayahuasca over a few years, I came to trust the breath so much because of what that teaching had given me for my journeys. That teaching taught me how to journey. And towards the end, there were times where I would be lying there for 3-4 hours at a time without my attention leaving my breath. Like my attention was just on my breath the entire time as I watched and listened. I think. I don't know if that's totally true, but that's what it felt like. I couldn't have done it without that very basic teaching. I just couldn't have done it. I would have gone crazy. And it was so simple, It's the hardest thing to do, seemingly. The hardest thing to do is take your attention off the stories and put it on your breath if you have to, I mean, it's a great thing to put it on. Eventually you can drop that too. You can just let attention rest. But as often as you can, go to the breath, it's something tangible. And it starts to create a habit. It starts to create a track that's been worn in to go to the breath or just let go, whenever you get lost in mind. But it's the hardest thing we do.